Well, good morning, YouTube. Welcome back to part 2 of the LA Chopper's handlebar install on the Prison Preacher's Milwaukee 8 Road King. Luckily, it is a little bit warmer out today. The high today is about 49, which is about what it is now. It's already afternoon. Much better than the 22 it was yesterday. So it's still cold out here in the shop, but it's not miserable cold. So I figured we'd come out here and get some more of this done. All right, guys, as you can see, I've already removed the seat, the fuel tank, the side cover. And here you can see where those front brake lines follow the wiring chase down here. There's a little cover that's going to cover that there and comes down into the ABS unit. Now, there are a total of 5 lines going to this ABS unit. The first is coming from the front master cylinder to the unit, and then there are 2 lines going out back to the front calipers. Those are going to be the 3 lines that we're going to be working on today. The other 2 lines are for the actual rear brake. So there's going to be one coming in from the rear master cylinder and then 1 line going out to the rear caliper. Internally, those 2 circuits are not connected whatsoever. So as long as we don't tamper with the rear brake lines as they go there, we shouldn't have to do any bleeding or anything like that in the rear system. They're completely isolated, so we're just focused on the front. So we want to make sure we do is trace these hoses and make sure that we are disconnecting the proper hose at the ABS unit. All right, guys, and from the other side of the bike, you can see where these 3 lines come down into the ABS unit. The one with the white decal is the supply line to the ABS unit. So it's coming from the front master cylinder. And the other 2 lines down there have orange decals on them. Those will be the return lines going back to the front calipers. So here on the ABS unit, the way that lays out is this one right here that's on the outermost portion towards the front is the supply from the master cylinder. And then this one here and this one back here will be the returns back to the calipers. These 2 here are for the rear, and you'll notice that they are painted black instead of a gray. That way we know which ones not to mess with. Guys, an important note right here. I want you to notice how dusty and dirty this ABS unit is. So before we break these lines loose and start the exchange with the new lines, I want to make sure to clean around this area. Not just the lines, but even the frame, the ECU, stuff like that up here. What you don't want is having any type of contaminant falling into those brake line holes once they're open. Any contamination in an ABS system or any braking system for that matter can definitely affect braking ability and do damage to the system. So you want to be very careful on that. So we're going to blow it off with a blowgun. We'll probably spray some soapy water on there and give it a rinse real quick just to ensure that we can keep it as clean as possible. All right, guys, and there you go. Nice and clean. Minimize contaminants. Okay, guys, and I've also traced all 3 of the hoses so that I know which ones go where on the other end. Like I said, the one in the middle here is going to be the one that comes from the master cylinder. The one that's further forward on the motorcycle is actually going to go to the left front brake caliper, and the one more towards the middle is going to go to the front right caliper. So at least now I know where they're going to be laid out. Luckily, this brake line kit, though it didn't come with hardly any instructions whatsoever, it did give you this, which tells you which line, how to identify them, goes to which position. That's all I need. Guys, there's a couple keepers here. As I'm pulling the lines out, you'll see this block right here. This kind of houses the lines. Gonna pull that out. This is the line that was going up to the master cylinder. It's also clipped into this block here, which then just slid underneath that. You're gonna have a couple of zip ties here along the way, but just get it all loose and then we'll break the bolt in at the end of it. All right, guys, as you can see, I've got all 3 lines now disconnected from the ABS unit. Want to point out, though, there was also this little clip on there that was really hard to see until you really got in there looking because it was kind of in the shadow underneath the frame rail. And it's just kind of a keeper to keep the lines organized, but it just snaps off. But it didn't snap off easy. And another note is on the line coming in from the master cylinder, that bolt right there was a 13 millimeter rather than a 12. So if you're going to do this job, just take note. So the master cylinder line is completely removed and sitting over there on the box. And then the other two lines are still here. So now I'm just gonna go up and fish them out They'll be a little bit challenging because you see where they turn into the hard lines here, and they're pre-formed and bent around things. All right, guys, and also before I get going too far, here, your ABS sensor for the front wheel is zip tied to that brake line, so we want to make sure and pull that out of the way before we go tugging on any wires. Okay, now that those banjo bleeders were out, we should be ready to pull the lines out. Now, just another note here. Ever since Harley started to incorporate the bleeder screw in with the banjo bolt, they did change that size to a 13 millimeter, where in most cases, banjo bolts on motorcycle braking systems are a 12 millimeter. So just a little difference in upsize there. So the only place left where these front brake lines are still secured to the motorcycle is back here below the triple tree, just so you see where we're at. Now, once you pop the plastic cover down, these are just popped into little channels. They're not actually bolted, so they should come out pretty easy. There we go. Now we just got to fish them out. We'll need both hands to do that. All right, guys, after cleaning thoroughly all of the banjo bolts, we're going to start the new installation. Now, this kit came with a bag of new crush washers and one single banjo bolt. No instructions to say why or where it's supposed to go, but it doesn't match up with any of the banjo bolts that I removed from the ABS unit. The only one it's compatible with is where the line goes into the master cylinder up on the front brake. Whether I'm going to use that or reuse the OEM one, I don't know. It is a different color. Not that that makes a lot of difference. But usually the OEM stuff is pretty good. Aftermarket, sometimes you got to be careful. And banjo bolts are kind of a fragile thing because they are hollow. If you over torque them, you can twist them or break them. I'll probably just reuse the OEM one and keep this new one as a backup emergency somewhere along in the shop. Okay, so the front right brake line, I've got just kind of laying in there. I'm going to get the banjo started down there, and then I'll kind of lay it all out and see how I'm going to route it. All right, guys, so that front right line, coming up through, it's looping around the steering neck and going back down to the right caliper, just like the original did. However, these lines will not fit in that keeper that they have here, so we're gonna have to come up with something to do there. But this is the most comfortable I can get the line routed. It's not fully secured. I just wanted to make sure that it reached and wasn't binding anywhere. All right, guys, so when routing the front right caliper line, once it wrapped around that neck and I went to go put the banjo / bleeder fitting into the caliper, it was a little tricky holding the fitting in just the right angle to get the thread started. Almost like they just didn't crimp the ends at the exact index that they should have been, so I had to keep a little pressure on it. So here I've routed the left side caliper line, and I started at the caliper instead and ran it through, and it was definitely a little bit easier. So as you can see, I've got that one put in as well. Now, none of these, as of right now, are tight. Everything is still just finger tight, so that if there's any changes need to be made or any adjustments or rolling or twisting, any of that can be done without having a permanent installation yet. Okay, one last line for the brakes, and that's the one that goes up to the master cylinder, which should be the easiest of all of them to route. Okay, guys, I am disappointed about one other small thing. They did not give me enough new crush washers to complete the job. They shorted me by 2 crush washers. So luckily, I had some here in the shop that were new, and I used them up here at the master cylinder. But, you know, in theory, there should have been 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of the small crush washers and 2 of the larger ones. And they only gave me 8 of the smalls and the 2 large. But I made it work. Another thing to take note is the original brake lines had very specific bends and blocks on the ends so that they only fit onto the ABS module one way. The line had that kind of a triangle. The left brake line had a slightly different triangle. And the right front brake line has the square block and these sharp 90-degree bends and very specific bend patterns. Well, the new lines had very specific bends as well, but not that dramatic. So all of these original lines came in behind the ABS unit. They made a 90-degree and turned into it. But the lines that they supply you, you can't do the 90-degree. There isn't enough clearance, and you don't want to make that sharp of a bend with the actual line. And of course, no directions. There was no clear guide to tell you approximately how to route them. So you just had to do kind of a little trial and error and get them to where they fit the most comfortably. And this is what it ended up with. So here's what I ended up with. Here's the inlet from the master cylinder. The one back here goes to the front left caliper, and this one here goes to the front right caliper. And actually I have that backwards. This one goes to the front right. This goes to the front left. So the bends that were in these allow them to just fit, but they don't go the complete 90-degree back here and then up like the originals did. But they all still fit kind of nice and tidy, and they're all in the keepers where they need to be. So I have one more keeper block to put in here right at the steering stem. However, I'm not going to do this one just yet because we still have to put the clutch line on, and it goes through this block as well. So I will do that upon final assembly. Okay guys, what I have here is the plastic box that went on the back side of the lower triple tree clamp. And this is where the lines that went to the calipers kind of snapped into this box, and then the box closed. And these two T20 torque spits just held it on there. With the flexible steel braided lines, I can't make this work. So I decided to remove it. And what I'm going to use is some of these metal retainers that I will reuse the existing Harley-Davidson screws. And by the way, this is actually an OEM Harley-Davidson part. I just keep stuff like this around the shop whenever I take a bike apart or something that gets scrapped or salvaged. I keep stuff like this, and it comes in handy in times like this where you don't have to go run to a store and get something. So I will attach these in the place where that was, and then I'll be able to secure those brake lines up there. And it'll look clean, it'll look professional, and not just be zip tied. I mean, zip ties would work fine, but if you can use something like this, it will look better. All right, guys, with the system completed, you can see I've tidied up the ABS wire. These are secured up here nicely. Looped and secured around the front. Going back to where they're supposed to go, and everything is nice and neat and routed professionally. All right, so at this point, I'm happy with the routing. I'm happy with the way everything's laying. So I can go through and tighten up all of those banjo bolts, and then we can reintroduce brake fluid to the system and bleed it all out. You guys also note that I left enough slack in the lines for movement of the suspension going up and down. Keep in mind, it's not going to lengthen much more than this because the front motorcycle wheel is off the ground completely. So the suspension is already at full extension, so you're not going to need a whole lot there. But as it compresses, I've left a slight little bend in the lines so that it can continue on that path as the suspension compresses rather than trying to just shove the line someplace tight. All right, guys, and as we move on to installing the clutch line, remember I mentioned I'm going to have to pull the exhaust? Well, I got lucky. The slave cylinder to the clutch system mounts behind this cover on the right-hand side of the motorcycle. And as you can see here, the line comes into the master cylinder, the slave cylinder assembly, runs down under the frame. The trouble I was having was getting this cover off of here. It was interfering with the exhaust itself. So what I did was I loosened up this one bolt right here. This one right inside here. This is what actually holds the exhaust to the engine casing. And then I loosened up the exhaust flange nuts, and I didn't actually remove them. I just loosened them up enough that I was able to pull the exhaust away from the motorcycle enough to get that cover out. And after that's out, I think I can get to everything else. Clutch line dumps under here. There is one bracket right there holding it to the frame. And then as it comes up the rest of the frame, there's just these clips that actually hold it to the frame rail. So this should come off nice and easy. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because you guys saw the brake lines, and that was way harder to do than the clutch line. But let me go ahead and get this off and go from there. Okay guys, I've got the clutch line in place, routed properly. A couple things that I found odd. Remember when we were doing the brakes, we were missing 2 crush washers. Well, the kit that came with the clutch line came with 4 crush washers, and you only need 2 because the side that goes in the master cylinder has got a compression type fitting on it. So had I looked ahead, I would have realized I would have had the 2. But either way, I'll just replace those to the ones that I took. The one thing I don't care about this new line is that if you look at this rubber block right here, this is what it kind of gives this line some support against the slave cylinder housing assembly down there. And there's also this block right here, this round block, I guess you can call it, and that's where that clamp went to the frame. The new line does not come with those. And these are kind of formed on there in the manufacturing process, but I'd really like to have them. So I think what I'm going to do is take a razor blade and I'm going to cut them off of this line so they can reinstall them on the new one, just because it'll give better vibration protection and stop it from clanking and making noise and being loose in that clamp. So I just think that's the right way to do it. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so there's the block back on the line. Once that cover goes on, it holds it nice and tight in here. And then, I don't know if you can see it down there very well, but the other keeper is back in there under that bracket as well. Okay guys, so I've gone back and reassembled the whole headlight assembly. And no, I did not put the headlight in just yet. And there's a reason for that, because on a Road King, in order to get to the bolts to adjust the handlebar, they sit underneath this cover. Well, I want to leave these bolts accessible for when the customer gets here. That way I can actually put him on the motorcycle. And at that point, I can adjust the bars, the levers, everything we need to fit him so that he is as comfortable as he can possibly be. The problem is if I put the rest of this together is this cover right here. This cover covers those bolts. But in order to get that cover off, I have to take this piece off, which goes here. And that little bolt goes down through there. Well, I can't get this piece off without reaching here to get that nut, so the headlight can't go in. So these are all things that I will put back together after I do the final adjustment with the customer here. It'll only take a few minutes to put that together while he's waiting. But I do have other services to do on this motorcycle, so we're going to call this the end of this video. Everything you needed to know to put the handlebars on was here. So I'm still going to bleed the brakes and the clutch, but I've already got videos out there on how to do that, so I'm not going to bore you guys with it. And if you need to know, you can always go back and rewatch that video that's already there. So that's going to close out this one. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until the next time I see you, you keep those engines running. And I probably don't need to mention, but obviously when it comes to brake fluid, you guys know what I'm going to use.